President Trump says he and the Democrats are closer to agreeing to at least $300 billion in a stimulus deal to help small American businesses hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. It comes as the US hit a grim milestone. Records show that 40,000 people have died from the virus. Despite the numbers, governors in several states have been under pressure following demonstrations from people demanding lockdown restrictions be lifted. Protesters are angry about how measures to control the spread of coronavirus have affected their work and the economy. Some have lost their jobs as a result and say they'd rather risk catching the virus than continue like this. Our North America editor John Sopel raised the issue with President Trump at his latest briefing.
If there were groups of people planning to protest tomorrow against the government shutdown, what would be your advice?
Against the shutdown?
Yeah, that they want the shutdown lifted. Should they go ahead if it's in a state where there haven't been 14 days?
I don't have any arrests. People feel that way. You're allowed to protest. I mean, they feel that way. I watched the protest and they were all 6 feet apart. I mean, it was a very orderly group of people. But, you know, some have gone too far. Some governors have gone too far. Some of the things that happened are maybe not so appropriate. And I think in the end it's not going to matter because we're starting to open up our states. And I think they're going to open up very well.
Well, I spoke to our Washington correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who said President Trump is defending people demonstrating against lockdowns.
Later, actually, on in that press conference, he was asked again about it, and he excused them even further by saying that they had what he called cabin fever. So these are, and bear in mind, these are guidelines that he himself has put in place, that he's then empathizing with people for protesting against. So in a sense, I suppose some people would say he's trying to have it both ways. There is some suggestion that some of the protests have been a bit coordinated, perhaps by particular lobby groups, not all of them, but some of them. And again, the president did appear to empathize with some of that nature of protest the other day in a tweet where he talked about liberating certain states from the restrictions they were under. So, you know, it's on the one hand, on the other a bit, the game this president is playing in terms of these protests.
Gary, I mean, when you look at the numbers, it's grim. The death toll has now gone past 40,000.
Yes, it has, almost 41,000 now, and over 750,000 cases altogether. The good news, if there is such a thing, is that hospitalizations in some of these hotspots like New York and Connecticut have started to come down, but there are other areas of concern as well, like Chicago and Boston potentially. In the meantime, people on Capitol Hill, the Senate in particular today, are trying to look at more help for small businesses. Because if you remember, we talked a couple of weeks ago about that $2 trillion spending package, an enormous spending package that had been agreed by Congress. Well, the $350 billion that was in there for small businesses has all gone. So the pot is empty, and a lot of small businesses still haven't been helped. So they're trying to negotiate yet another package on top of that to really keep people on the payroll. That's essentially what it's for.
That was our Washington correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue there. Well, staying in the United States, and President Trump has said the US government wants to send a team into China to investigate the coronavirus outbreak. The US and other countries have been highly critical of Beijing's handling of the crisis. It's reported that American teams want to investigate security at a laboratory in Wuhan, and an unsubstantiated theory pushed in conservative media outlets in the US that the virus escaped from the facility into the surrounding population. The scientific consensus is that the virus, which causes COVID-19, originated in animals, most likely in bats, and was transmitted via live animal markets. Well, to discuss this with me further is Jamie Metzl, who was a former member of the US National Security Council and is now a member of the World Health Organization's Expert Advisory Committee. He's also the author of Hacking Darwin, a book that covers the US-China rivalry. Thank you very much, Jamie, for joining us here on the programme. As I was saying, there is currently a lot of discussion about the origins of this particular virus. And of course, as the pressure mounts on China, people want to understand where it came from and how.
Yeah, that's exactly right. it's critically important that we understand where this virus and this outbreak come from, and we have to do it quickly. And definitely, at least I, and I think most people, abhor any kind of intolerance, racism, or anything like that. But asking the tough questions about where this comes from, I think, is critically important. Most scientists agree this is not some kind of bioweapon or some kind of manipulated virus. But I certainly believe, and I try to look very dispassionately at the evidence, that it's probably most likely, and it's impossible now without more evidence to confirm this, that this could very well be a leak from one of the Chinese virology institutes in Wuhan. I've posted a lot of the evidence on my personal website, and I just think that we have to ask.
Just understand when you talk about the evidence, because as we've said, the scientists overwhelmingly believe that it had come from animals and most likely bats, and there's a lot of talk about the live animal wet markets, as they're known. But just talk about the evidence.
That's not correct. What you just said is actually not correct. I think most people agree that this is a zoonotic virus that jumped from animals and to humans. But the question is, did it happen in a wet market, which seems extremely unlikely? And again, I have that evidence on my site. Or is this a virus that was isolated in a lab with the best of intentions of developing a vaccine, and there was yet another security breach in one of those labs? So I think that the way you've characterized this, I think, is actually not correct.
So then based on what? I mean, I know you talk about your blog, but there was a Washington Post article just last week looking at cables from 2018. And of course, Fox News and the president are pushing this as well, this theory about the labs. But just if you can briefly give us a sense of what evidence you've got. Sure.
And just to be clear, I am a progressive. The last thing that I would want to do is to support anything, not anything, but most of anything that what President Trump is saying, or the toxins that are being spewed on Fox News. But let's look at the evidence. First, if this was a zoonotic jump, how would it have happened? This was a seafood market, not a bat market, not a civet market. If it had been those animals, there likely would have been. They don't have pangolins indigenous in Wuhan. They would have gone from someplace else. The Lancet in January had reports that there were cases of this coronavirus, of the pandemic, not yet a pandemic, in Wuhan before the cluster in the seafood market. And we have there's lots of information about not just the cover-up and how aggressive the cover-up was, but about the nature of the research that was being done in these Wuhan labs.
And of course, again, this is all speculation. But at the heart of this, Jamie, is really the great power competition between China and the US, which you've written extensively about, and how you now work with a rival like China.
The United States and China must work together closely in our interdependent world. To ask questions about where this outbreak comes from doesn't mean we have to undermine our relationship with China. I mean, it would be a blow if what I'm saying is accurate. But the way I see this, imagine there's a plane crash, and then we would say, some people may say, well, now's not the time to ask why the plane crashed. But there are planes in the air. We don't know if these pandemics come in ones or twos or threes. There could be this same problem that has brought us this pandemic could be brewing now. So if we don't know where this is coming from, if we're not asking the tough questions, shame on us. But that doesn't mean this has to play into some terrible rivalry, that this has to play into racism or intolerance. If there's one thing this virus has taught us, it's that we're all interconnected. And the only way we're going to solve our problems is by working far closer together than we have in the past. But asking tough questions and getting to the truth as best we can needs to be part of that process.
Jamie Metzl, great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.